And I'm at the hour. So, hello everyone. As always, my name is SkitterSkreetch. I am a comedy rep. So, what are we doing today then? So, let's run down the checklist. No follow since last stream, so no thanks to give out. No badges to advertise. No one has claimed first yet, so we've got to wait for that. No new books today. At least I'm at the library, so that's my 4 normal chat things.
Ah, the rat!
Abe, good to have you. Welcome to the stream. Right, so what are we doing here today? Fitz, congratulations on first. Wild's kindness has finally come good. Yeah, welcome to you, Fitz, as well. Right, let's, well, I guess let's head over there and mark you up then, shall we? Right. So, Fitz Whiskers. FRTZWHRSKER and then underscore. Yeah. Welcome to the board, Fitz. You've got a long way to go, but you've taken the first step. Yeah. Yeah, welcome to the stream. So. Now that's done. What we doing? Yeah, okay, that was what I was doing. So, I was going to ask you guys, because Lamp is still insisting that we need to farm clips for some reason, even though the clips do not get views. I want to ask you guys what you've been thinking of them. Hey, NASCAR, good timing. Good to have you here. Yeah. I want to ask you guys what you guys have been thinking about the poetry as we come in and start these things. Because it feels like it's a nice way to do introductions, but I don't know if it's something that just I like or if it's something you guys are enjoying too. So I want to run by you. Do you think we should stick with the poetry? Do you think I should go back to doing little bits of lore when we start out? Do you think we should do something else? I want to put it to you guys because you're the ones who are watching this. Any thoughts? Any preferences? Any ideas and meanings? I see, I understand what you're saying. Right, okay. This is good feedback. So what I'm hearing mostly is that you guys hate making choices and decisions, which is a fair and valid position to hold. Okay, so that being the case, I suppose for the time being we'll stick with the poetry, because Lamp is very insistent that I do it. Even though, again, I do not think the clips are important or do well, but it's what we have. So, that being the case, Let's move on down the way of them. And do the standard. So, as we are continuing with the poetry, I have 3 poems today, because I like one of them, but it wasn't good for clips, and Lamp is very insistent that the clips are important. First things first, we have What to Say Upon Being Asked to Be Friends by Julian T. Brolaski. Why speak of hate when I do bleed for love? Not hate my love, but love doth bite my tongue, till I taste stuff that makes my rhyming rough. So flatter I my fever for the one, for whom I inline mourn, though seem to shun. A rose is arrow is arrows. So what, if I confuse the shade that I have become, with wine-dark substance in a lover's cup? But stop my tonguely wound, I've bled enough, if I be fair or false or freaked with fear. If I my tongue in locked boxes immure, blame not me, for I am sick with love. Yet would I be your friend most willingly, since friendship would infect me killingly. That's what to say upon being asked to be friends. Next up we have Sonnets from the Portuguese, number 43. How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Ways, by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feelings out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs, and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose, with my lost saints. I love thee with their breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and, if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. And that's Sonnets from the Portuguese 43. Last then, and the one which Lamp did not want me to do because it will not fit as a clip, we have The House of Rest by Julia Ward Howe. I will build a house of rest, square the corners every one, at each angle on his breast shall a cherub take the sun, rising, risen, sinking down, weaving day's unequal crown. In the chambers light as air shall responsive footstep fall. Brother, sister, art thou there? Hush, we need not jar nor call, need not turn to seek the face, shut in rapture's hiding place. Heavy load and mocking care shall from back and bosom part. Thought shall reach the thrill of prayer, patience play in the dome of art. None shall praise or merit claim, nor a joy be called by name. With a free, unmeasured tread shall we pace the cloisters through, rest enfranchised like the dead, rest till love be born anew. Weary thought shall take his time, free of task-work loosed from rhyme. No reproof shall grieve or chill, every sin doth stand confessed. None need murmur that this was ill, therefore do they grant us rest. Contemplation making whole every ruin of the soul. Pictures shall as softly look as in distance shows delight. Slowly shall each saintly book turn its pages in our sight. Not the study's wealth confuse, urging zeal to pale abuse. Children through the window peep, not reproachful though our own. Hush the parent, passion deep, and the household's eager tone. One above, divine and true, make us children like to you. Measured bread shall build us up at the hospitable board. In contentment's golden cup is the guiltless liquor poured. May the beggar pledge the king in that spirit gathering. Oh, my house is far away, yet it sometimes shuts me in. Imperfection mars each day while the perfect work begins. Is the house of labour best? Can I build the house of rest? And that's House of Rest by Julia Ward Howe. A poem I thought worth reading, even without being able to make a clip of it. But now, as things are ending, out the lights. And back we are to our more regular style, eh? Now, that being our introduction done, and a little bit of poetry, I'll have a quick swallow of water and then we'll press on today's book. So, as I made some dirty allusions to in my promotional posts, today we'll be looking at the literature, or the short stories of one Honoré de Balzac, who is a notable French novelist, a very serious figure, even if his name does sound a little bit funny. And we've got two here, we've got the Conscript and the Atheist Mass. We're trying to work our way through both. Altogether they come to about 50 pages, so probably a couple hours of reading today. But yeah. As always, if at any point I should be, during this reading, you should miss a couple of words or something and need me to go back, let me know, I'm happy to do so. If you have thoughts, comments, questions, let me know and I'm happy to stop and have a word, or if they're going to be long discussions, to hold off to the end of the short story and then go over it then. Always happy to hear from you if you have something to say. I do delight in it so much. The goal is to be a discussion channel on literature, not just a reading channel on literature, but of course you are welcome to stay on live if you just want to listen to the story. Having said that, and unless anyone has something to say or a redeem they want to call, and without any further ado, so long as you are sitting comfortably, I shall begin. The Atheist Mass. A doctor, to whom science owes a fine psychological theory, and who, while still young, achieved a place among the celebrities of the Paris School of Medicine, that centre of enlightenment to which all the doctors of Europe pay homage, Dr. Bianco practiced surgery for a long time before deserting himself to medicine. His early studies was directed by one of the greatest of all French surgeons, by the celebrated Desplan, who passed through the world of science like a meteor. Even his enemies admit that he took with him to the grave a method that could not be handed on to others. Like all men of genius, he had no heirs. He carried his skill within him, and he carried it away with him. A surgeon's fame is like an actor's. He exists only so long as he is alive, and his talent can no longer be appreciated once he is gone. Actors and surgeons, great singers too, and virtuoso musicians who, by their playing, increase tenfold the power of music, are all heroes of the moment. Desplan's life is proof of the resemblance between the destinies of these transitory geniuses. His name, which was so famous yesterday, is almost forgotten today. It will remain only in his own field, without going beyond it. But extraordinary conditions are surely necessary for the name of a scholar to pass from the domain of science into the general history of humanity. Did Desplan have that width of knowledge which makes a man the mouthpiece of the representative of an age? Desplan possessed a godlike glance. He understood the patient and his disease by means of a natural or acquired intuition, which allowed him to appreciate the diagnosis appropriate to the individual, to decide the precise moment, the hour, the minute at which he should operate, taking into account atmospheric conditions and temperamental peculiarities. To be able to collaborate with nature in this way, he had then studied the endless combinations of beings and elemental substances contained in the atmosphere or provided by the earth for man, who absorbs them and uses them for a particular purpose. Did he use that power of deduction and analogy, which Quiver owes his genius? However that may be, this man understood the secrets of the flesh. He understood its past as well as its future, by studying the present. Did he contain all science in his person, as did Hippocrates, Galen, Aristotle? Did he lead an old school towards new worlds? No. If it is impossible to refuse this constant observer of human chemistry, the ancient science of magism, that is to say, the knowledge of the elements in fusion, that the causes of life, a life before life, and what life will be, judging from its antecedents before it exists. All this, unfortunately, were personal to him. In his life, he was isolated by egoism, and today that egoism is the death of his fame. Over his tomb there is no statue proclaiming the future in ringing tones, the mysteries which genius seeks out at his own expense. But perhaps this plant's talent were in keeping with his belief, and consequently mortal. For him, the terrestrial atmosphere were like a generative bag. He saw the earth as if it were an egg in its shell, and, unable to know where the egg or the end come first, he denied both the fowl and the egg. He believed neither in the animal anterior to man, nor in the spirit beyond it. Desplan were not in doubt. He affirmed his opinion. He was like many other scholars in his frank, unmixed atheism. They are the best people in the world, but incorrigible atheists such as religious people don't believe exist. It were hardly possible for such a man who held a different opinion, but from his youth he was used to dissecting the living being par excellence, before, during and after life, and to examining all its functions without finding the unique soul that is indispensable to religious theories. This plan recognised a cerebral centre, a nervous centre, and a circulatory centre, which the first two do duty for each other so well that at the end of his life he was convinced that his sense of hearing was not absolutely necessary to hear, nor the sense of sight absolutely necessary to see, and that the solar plexus could replace them without anyone noticing it. He thus found two souls in man, and this fact confirmed his atheism, though it still tells us nothing about God. He died, they say, impenitent to the last, as unfortunately do many fine geniuses. May God forgive them. This really great man's life exhibited many pettinesses. He used the expression of his enemies, who in their jealousy wanted to diminish his fame. It would be more appropriate to call them apparent contradictions. Envious or stupid people, who do not know the reasons which explain the activities of superior minds, immediately take advantage of a few superficial contradictions to make accusations on which they obtain a momentary judgment. If, later on, the plans which have been attacked are crowned with success, as the preparations are correlated with the results, some of the calumnies, don't know that word, calumnies, calumnies, which was made beforehand, remain. Thus, in our own time, Napoleon was condemned by our contemporaries when he spread out the wings of his eagle over England. But we needed the events of 1822 to explain 1804, the flat-bottomed boats at Boulogne. There's an author's note here. In 1804, Napoleon planned to invade England using a fleet of flat-bottomed boats based on Boulogne. They were unable to gain command of the sea and abandoned the plan in favour of the land conquest of Europe. In 1822, the French government wanted to intervene in the civil conflict in Spain in spite of the vigorous protest of Great Britain. Balzac's point over is unclear. Yeah, I don't fully read him there either. Since this plan's fame and scientific knowledge were unassailable, his enemies attacked his strange disposition and his character. One fact, he was simply what the English call eccentric. At times he dressed magnificently, like the tragedian Crebillon. At times he seemed unusually indifferent to clothes. Sometimes he would be seen in a carriage, sometimes on foot. He was now sharp-tempered, now kind, apparently hard and stingy, yet capable of offering his fortune to his exiled rulers who honoured him by accepting it for a few days. No man has inspired more contradictory judgments, although to obtain the order of St. Michel, or Michael's, which doctors are not supposed to solicit, he was capable of dropping a book of hours from his pocket at court. You can be sure that inwardly he laughed at the whole thing. He had a profound contempt for mankind, having studied them from above and from below, and surprised them without pretense as they performed the most solemn as well as the pettiest acts of life. A great man's gifts often hang together. If one of these giants has more talent than wit, his wit is still greater than that of a man who says simply he is witty. All genius presupposes moral insight. This insight might be applied to some speciality, but he who sees the flower must see the sun. The doctor who heard a diplomat whose life he had saved asked, "How is the emperor?" and he replied, "The courtier is coming back to life, the man will follow." was not only a surgeon or a physician, he was also extremely witty. Thus the close and patient observer of humanity will justify Desplan's exorbitant pretensions, and will realise as he himself realised that he was capable of being as great a minister as he were a surgeon. I'm going to pause briefly to have a quick swallow of water. Among the riddles which Desplan's life reveals to his contemporaries, we have chosen one of the most interesting, because the solution will be found at the end of this tale, and will answer some of the foolish accusations which have been made against him. Of all the pupils whom Desplan had at his hospital, Horace Bianchon was one of those to whom he became most warmly attached. Before doing his internship at the Hôtel Dieu, Horace Bianchon was a medical student, living in miserable boarding houses in the Latin Quarter, known by the name of La Maison Vainqueur. There are two, not Vainqueur, Vainqueur. There are two authors note with that. After the Hôtel Dieu, L'Hôtel Dieu were one of the oldest and most important hospitals in Paris, and for La Maison Vainqueur, life in La Maison Vainqueur is depicted in Balzac's novel Le Pierre Goriot. There this poor young man experienced a desperate poverty which is a kind of melting pot, whence great talents emerge pure and incorruptible, just as diamonds could be subject to any kind of shock without breaking. In the violence of their unleashed passions they acquire the most unshakable honesty, and by dint of the constant labour with which they have contained their balked appetites, they become used to the struggles which are the lot of genius. Horace was an upright young man, incapable of double dealing in affairs of honour, going straight to the point without fuss, as capable of pawning his coat for his friends, as of giving them his time and his night's rest. In short, Horace was one of those friends who are not worried about what they receive in exchange for what they give, certain as they are to receive in their turn more than they will give. Most of his friends have for him that inner respect which is inspired by unostentatious goodness, and several of them were afraid of his strictures. But Horace exercised these virtues without being prudish. He was neither a Puritan nor a preacher. He swore quite readily when given advice, and enjoyed a good meal in gay company when opportunity offered. He were good company, no more squeamish than a soldier, bluff and open, not a sailor, but the sailor of today is a wily diplomatist. But like a fine young man who has nothing to hide in this life. He walked with his head high and his heart light. In a word, Horace was the Pylades of more than one Orestes, creditors being today the most real shape assumed by the ancient Furies. He wore his poverty with a gaiety which is perhaps one of the greatest elements of courage, and like all those who have nothing, he contracted few debts. Sober as a camel, brisk as a stag, he was unwavering both in his principles and his behaviour. The happiness of Bianchon's life began on the day when the famous surgeon obtained evidence of the good qualities and failings which the one as much as the other made Dr. Horace Bianchon doubly precious to his friends. When a clinical chief adopts a young man, that young man has, as they say, his foot's in the stirrup. Desplan always took Bianchon with him to act as his assistant in well-to-do arts, where some reward would nearly always find its way into the student's purse, and where little by little the mysteries of Parisian life were revealed to the young provincial. Desplan also kept him in his surgery during consultations, and gave him work to do there. Sometimes he would send him to accompany a rich patient to a spa. In short, he was making a practice for him. The result of all this was that after a time the lord of surgery had a devoted slave. These two men, one at the height of his fame and leader of his profession, enjoy an immense fortune and an immense reputation. The other, a modest omega, having neither fortune nor fame, become intimate friends. The great Desplan told his assistant everything. He knew if a certain lady had sat down on a chair beside the master, or on the famous surgery couch where Desplan slept. Bianchon knew the mysteries of that temperament, both the lion-like and bull-like, which in the end expanded and abnormally developed the great man's chest, and caused his death from enlargement of the arm. The student studied the eccentricities of Desplan's busy life, the plans made by his sordid avarice, the hopes of the politician concealed behind the scientist. He foresaw the disappointments in store for the only feeling hidden in the art, which are ardent rather than hard. One day Bianchon told Desplan that a poor water carrier from the Saint Jacques water had an horrible illness caused by fatigue and poverty. This poor overnut had eaten only potatoes during the severe winter of 1821. Desplan left all his patients. At the risk of working his horse to death, he rode as fast as he could, followed by Bianchon, to the poor man's house, and himself had him carried to the nursing home founded by the famous Dubois in the Faubourg Saint-Denis. Desplan attended the man, and when he had cured him, gave him the money to buy a horse and water car. This overnut was remarkable for one original characteristic. One of his friends fell ill. He took them straight away to Desplan and said to his benefactor, "I would not have allowed him to go to another doctor." Surly as he was, Desplan grasped the water carrier's hand and said, "Bring more to me." And yet the peasants from the canal admitted to the Hotel Dieu, who took the greatest care of him. Bianchon had already noticed several times that his chief had a predilection for overnats, and especially for water carriers. As Desplan had a kind of pride in his treatments at the Hotel Dieu, his pupil didn't see anything very strange in that. One day, as Bianchon was crossing the Place Saint-Sulpice, he noticed his master going into the church about 9 o'clock in the morning. Desplan, who at that period of his life never moved a step except by carriage, were on foot and slipping in by the door of the Rue du Petit Lion, as if he had been going into a house of doubtful reputation. Bianchon's curiosity was naturally aroused, since he knew his master's opinion, and that he were a devil of a Calvinist, and in brackets, devil with a Y, which in Rabelais seems to suggest a superior devilry. Slipping into Saint-Sulpice, he was not a little astonished to see the great Desplan, that atheist without pity for the angels, who cannot be subjected to the surgeon's knife, who cannot have sinus or gastric trouble. That dauntless scoffer kneeling humbly, and where? In the chapel of the Virgin, where he listened to a mass, paid for the cost of the service, gave alms for the poor, all as solemnly as if he had been performing an operation. He certainly didn't come to clear up questions about the virgin birth, said Bianchon with boundless astonishment. If I had seen him holding one of the tassels of the canopy on Corpus Christi Day, I would have taken it as a joke. But at this hour alone, with no one to see him, that certainly gives one food for thought. Bianchon did not wish to look as if he was spying on the chief surgeon of the Hotel Dieu. He went away. By chance, Desplan invited him to dinner that very day, not at home but at a restaurant. Between the fruit and the cheese, Bianchon managed skillfully to bring the conversation round to the subject of the Mass, calling it a masquerade and a farce. A farce, said Desplan, which has cost Christendom more blood than all Napoleon's battles and all Bruson's leeches. The Mass is a papal invention which goes no further back than the 6th century, which is based on hoc est corpus. What torrents of blood had to be spilt to establish Corpus Christi Day? By the institution of this feast, the court of Rome intended to proclaim its victory in the matter of the real presence, a schism which troubled the Church for 3 centuries. The wars of the Counts of Toulouse and the Albigensians are the tail end of this affair. The Vaudois and the Albigensians refused to recognise the innovation. Author's note here, the Vaudois and the Albigensians were 12th century heretical sects in the south of France. In short, Desplan enjoyed himself, given free rein to his atheistic wit, and pouring out a flood of Voltairian jokes, or to be more precise, an horrible parody of the Citateur. The Citateur was an anti-clerical pamphlet by Pigault Lebrun. Author's note again, I should say. And pause here to swallow of water. Well, Bianchon said to himself, where is the pious man I saw this morning? He said nothing. He had doubts whether he had really seen his chief at Saint-Sulpice. Desplan would not have bothered to lie to Bianchon. They both knew each other too well. They had already exchanged ideas on subjects which were just as serious, and they had discussed systems, their natura rea, probing or dissecting them with the knives and the scalpels of incredulity. 3 months went by. Bianchon did not follow up the incident, although it remained stamped on his memory. One day in the course of that year, one of the doctors at the Hotel Dieu took Desplan by the arm in Bianchon's presence, as if to ask him a question. "What are you going to do at Saint-Sulpice, my dear chief?" he asked. "I went to see a priest who had a diseased knee. Madame la Duchesse d'Angoulême did me the honour of recommending me," said Desplat. The doctor was satisfied with the excuse, but not so Bianchon. Ah, so he goes to see bad news in the church. You were going to hear a mass, the student said to herself. Bianchon determined to keep a watch on Desplat. He recalled the day and the time on which he had surprised him going to Saint-Sulpice, and he determined to go there the following year on the same day, and at the same time to find out if he would surprise him there again. If that happened, the regularity of his worship would justify a scientific investigation, for in such a man there should not be a direct contradiction between thought and deed. The following year, on the day and at the hour in question, Bianchon, who was by this time no longer Desplat's assistant, saw the surgeon's carriage stop at the corner of the Rue de Torton and the Rue de Petit-Lion. From there his friend kept stealthily along by the walls of Saint-Sulpice, where he again heard mass at the altar of the Virgin. It was certainly Desplat, the chief surgeon, the atheist in power, the pious man on occasion. The plot became more involved. The famous scientist's persistence complicated everything. When Desplat had left the church, Bianchon went up to the sacristan who come the minister of the chapel and asked him if the gentleman were a regular attendant. I have been here for 20 years, said the sacristan, and for all that time I'm sure Desplat has been coming 4 times a year to hear the mass. It was he who founded it. He founded it, said Bianchon as he walked away. This is as much a mystery as the Immaculate Conception, which itself must make a doctor an unbeliever. Although Dr. Bianchon were a friend of Desplat's, some time went by before he was in a position to speak to him about this strange circumstance of his life. If they met at a consultation or in society, it was difficult to find that moment of confidence and solitude when, with feet up on the fire dogs and heads leaning against the backs of their chairs, 2 men tell each other their secrets. Finally, 7 years later, after the 1830 revolution, when the people stormed the archbishopric, when, inspired by republican sentiments, they destroyed the golden crosses which appeared like flashes of lightning in this vast sea of houses, when disbelief and violence swaggered together through the streets, Bianchon surprised Desplat going into Saint-Sulpice. The doctor followed him in and took a place near him without his friend making the least sign or showing his least surprise. Both of them heard the foundation mass. Will you tell me, my friend, Bianchon said to Desplat, when they were outside the church, the reason for this display of piety? I have already caught you 3 times going to mass. You must tell me the reason for this mysterious activity. Explain to me the flagrant discrepancy between your opinions and your behaviour. You don't believe in God, yet you go to mass. My dear chief, you must answer me. I am like many pious men who appear profoundly religious but quite atheistic as we are, you and I. And he let forth a torrent of epigrams about political personalities, whom the best known provides us in this century with a new edition of Molière's Tartuffe. That's not what I'm talking about, said Bianchon. I want to know the reason for which you have just been doing here. Why did you find this mess? Well, my dear friend, said Desplat, since I'm on the brink of the grave, there is no reason why I shouldn't speak to you about the beginning of my life. At this moment, Bianchon and the great man happened to be in Rue de Poitevin, one of the most horrible streets in Paris. Desplat pointed to the 6th story of one of those houses, which is shaped like an obelisk, and have a medium-sized door opening into a passage. At the end of the passage is a spiral staircase, lit by apertures called jours de soufflance. The houses were of greenish colour. On the ground floor lived a furniture dealer. A different kind of poverty seemed to lodge on each floor. Raising his arm with an emphatic gesture, Desplat said to Bianchon, I lived up there for 2 years. I know the place. Darts lived here, and I came in here almost every day in my youth. That time we called it the Jar of Great Men. Well, what of it? The mass that I have just heard is linked to events which took place at the time when I lived in the attic, where you so tell me Diets lived. It is the one where a line of washing is dangling at the window above a pot of flowers. I had such a difficult time to start with, my dear Bianchon. I can dispute the pain of the sufferings of Paris with anyone. I have put up with everything, hunger, thirst, lack of money, lack of clothes, of footwear, or linen, everything that is hardest about poverty. I have blown on my numb fingers in that jar of great men, which I should like to visit again with you. I worked during one winter, when I could see my own head steaming, and a cloud of my own breath rising like horse's breath on a frosty day. I don't know what enables a man to stand up for such a life. I were alone, without help, without a father and either the bar books or to pay the expense of my medical education. I had no friends, and my irritable, sensitive, restless temperament did me no good. No one could see that my bad temper was caused by the difficulties and the work of a man who, from his position at the bottom of the social ladder, was striving to reach the top. But I can tell you to whom I don't need to pretend, that I have the basis of a good feeling and keen sensitivity, which will always be the prerogative of men who, after having been stuck for a long time in the slough of poverty, are strong enough to climb to any kind of summit. I could get nothing from my family or my own beyond the inadequate allowance they made me. In short, at this period of my life, all I had to eat in the morning were a roll which the baker in the Rue de Petit sold me more cheaply because it were yesterday's, or the day before yesterday's. I crumbled it up into some milk, and so my morning meal cost me only 2 sous. I dined only every other day at a boarding house where dinner cost 16 sous. In this way I spent only 9 sous a day. You know as well as I do the care I had to take of my clothes and my footwear. I don't think, later on in life, we were as much distressed by our colleagues' disloyalty as you and I were when we saw the mocking grin of a shoe that were becoming unseen, or a narmole or a frock coat split. I drank only water. I had the greatest respect for cafes. Soppy seemed to me like a promised land which the Lucelli of the Latin Quarter alone had the right to patronise. Sometimes I wondered whether I would ever be able to have a cup of white coffee there, or play a game of dominoes. In short, I transferred to my work the fury which poverty inspired in me. I tried to master scientific knowledge, so that I should have an immense personal worth deserving of the place I would reach when I emerged from my obscurity. I consumed more oil than bread. The light which lit up those stubborn vigils cost me more than my food. The struggle was long, hard, and unrelieved. I aroused no feeling of friendship in those around me. To make friends, you must mix with young people. Have a few sous that you can go and have a drink with them. Go with them everywhere where students go. I had nothing. And no one in Paris realises that nothing is nothing. When there were any question of revealing my poverty, I experienced that nervous contradiction of the throat, which makes our patients think that a ball is rising up from the gullet into the larynx. Later on I met people who, born rich and never having lacked for anything, don't know the problem of this rule of 3. The young man is to crime as 100 sous pieces to X, his gilded fool say to me. Why did you get into debt? Why did you take on such crushing obligations? They remind me of the princes who, knowing that people were dying of hunger, asked, why don't they buy cake? I should very much like to see one of these rich people who complains that I charge too much for operating on him, alone in Paris, without a penny, without friend, without credit, and forced to work with his 2 hands to live. What would he do? Where would he satisfy his hunger? Bien sûr, if at times you have seen me bitter and hard, it was because I was superimposing my early sufferings on the lack of feelings of selfishness, the selfishness, which I had thousands of examples in our places. Or I was thinking of the obstacles which hatred, envy, jealousy, and calumny have placed between me and success. In Paris, where certain people see you ready to put your foot in the stirrup, some will pull you back by the coat-tail, others loosen the buckle of the saddle girth so you will fall and break your head. This one takes the shoes of your horse, this one steals your whip. The least treacherous is the one you see coming up to shoot you at point-blank range. You have enough talent, my dear fellow, soon to be acquainted with the horrible, unending battle which mediocrity wages upon superiority. If one evening you lose 25 louis, the next day you'll be accused of being a gambler, and your best friend will say that the day before you left 25,000 francs. If you have a headache, you'll be called a lunatic. If you have one outburst of temper, they will say you're a social misfit. If, in order to resist the army of pygmies, you muster your superior forces, your best friend will cry out that you want to eat up everything that you claim to have the right to dominate and lord it over others. In short, your good qualities will become failings, your failings will become vices, and your virtues will be crimes. If you have saved a man, they'll say you've killed him. If your patient is in circulation again, they will affirm that you've sacrificed the future to the present. If he's not dead, he will die. Hesitating, you will be lost. Invent anything at all, claim you're just due, you'll be regarded as a sly character, difficult to deal with, will stand in the way of the young men. So, my dear fellow, if I don't believe in God, I believe still less in man. You recognise me in me a Desplan very different from the Desplan everyone speaks ill of, don't you? It's not rummaging in this mucky. Well, I used to live in this house. I was busy working and passed my first examination. I hadn't a sou. I'd reached one of those extreme situations where, you know, a man says to himself, I should join the army. I had one last hope. I was expecting from home a trunk full of linen, a present from old aunts and the kind who, knowing nothing of Paris, think of your shirts and imagine that with 30 francs a month their nephew lives on caviar. The trunk arrived while I was at the school. The carriage cost 40 francs. The porter, a German cobbler who lived in a garret, had paid the money and were keeping the trunk. I went for a walk in the Rue de Fou Saint-Germain-des-Prés and the Rue de l'École des Médecins. I could not think of a plan which would deliver my trunk to me without my having to pay the 40 francs. Naturally, I would have paid them after I had sold the linen. My stupidity made me realise I was gifted for nothing but surgery. My dear fellow, sensitive souls whose gifts are deployed in the lofty sphere are lacking in the spirit of intrigue, which is so resourceful in contriving schemes. Their genius lays in chance. They don't seek for things, they come on them by chance. Well, I returned at nightfall, at the same time that my neighbour, a water carrier named Bourgeat, and man from St. Flour were going home. They knew each other in the way two tenants do, have rooms on the same landing, and who hear each other sleeping, coughing and dressing. But in the end they get used to one another. My neighbour informed me that the landlord, to whom I owned 3 quarters rent, had turned me out. I had to clear out the next day. He himself had been given notice because of his calling. I spent the most unhappy night of my life. Where would I find a carrier to remove my poor household affairs and my books? How would I be able to pay the carrier and the porter? Where were I to go? I kept on asking myself these unanswerable questions, through my tears, like a madman repeating a refrain. I fell asleep. Poverty has in its favour an exquisite sleep, filled with beautiful dreams. The next morning, just as I was eating my bowl full of crumbled bread and milk, Bourgeat came in and said in his bad French, Monsieur l'étudiant, I'm a poor man, a foundling from the Charm Floor Hospital. I've no father or mother and I'm not rich enough to get married. You haven't many relations either, or much in the way of hard cash. Now listen, I've got an handcart downstairs which I've hired for 2 sous an hour. We'll take all our things. If you're willing, we'll look for digs together since we're turned out of here. After all, this place isn't an earthly paradise. I'll pause here for a moment since the first paragraph breaking a few pages and have my swallow of water. I know that all right, Bourgeat, my good fellow, I replied, but I'm in rather a jam. Downstairs I have a trunk containing linen worth 100 crowns. With that I could pay the landlord and what I owe the porter, but I haven't got 100 sous. That don't matter, I've got some cash, Bourgeat replied cheerfully, showing me a filthy old leather purse. Keep your linen. Bourgeat paid my 3 quarters rent and his own, and settled with the porter, and he put our furniture and my linen onto his cart and dragged it through the streets, stopping in front of every house which had to let sign hanging out. My job was to go up and see if the place to let would suit us. At midday we were still wandering about the Latin Quarter without having found anything. The price were a great difficulty. Bourgeat suggested we should have lunch at a wine shop. We left our cart at the door. Towards evening I discovered the Cour de Rohan, passage de commerce, 2 rooms separated by the stair and the attic at the top of an house. The rent was 60 francs a year. We were roused at last, my humble friend and I. We had dinner together. Bourgeat, who earned about 50 sous a day, had about 100 crowns. He was soon going to be able to realise his ambition and buy a water cart and an horse. When he learned about my situation, for he dragged my secrets out from me with deep cunning and a good nature, the memory of which still touches my heart, he gave up for some time his old life's ambition. Bourgeat had been a street merchant. For 22 years, he sacrificed his 100 crowns to my future. Desplan grabbed Bianchon's arm with emotion. He gave me the money I needed for my exams. My friend, that man realised I had a mission, that the needs of my intelligence were more important than his own. He took care of me. He called me his child and lent me the money I needed to buy books. Sometimes he would come in very quietly to watch me working. Last but not least, He took care, as a mother might have done, to see that instead of the bad and insufficient food which I'd been forced to put up with, I had an healthy and plentiful diet. Bourgeat, who was a man of about 40, had the face of a medieval burgess, a dome-like forehead, and an head that a painter might have used as a model for Lycurgus. The poor man's heart was filled with affection which had no outlet. The only creature that had ever loved him were a poodle which had died a short time before. He talked to me continually about it, and asked me if he thought the church would be willing to say masses for the repose of its soul. His dog were, so he said, a true Christian, and he had gone to church with him for 12 years without ever barking there. He had listened to the organ without opening its mouth, and squatted beside them with a look that made him think it was praying with him. This man transferred all his affection to me. He accepted me as a lonely and unhappy creature. He had become for me the most attentive mother, the most tactful of benefactors. In short, the ideal of that virtue which delights in its own work. Whenever I met him in the street, he would glance at me with an understanding look filled with remarkable nobility. Then he would pretend to walk as if he were carrying nothing.
Ah, the rat!
Tenor, good to have you, my friend. Welcome in. Hey! Oh, I like your bloom badge. I appreciate you being there. I'm trying to think if I can catch up with the story we're in, but we're near the end of it now. It's essentially just a doctor relaying his life story. And we're currently talking over his benefactor. He seemed happy to see me in good health and well dressed. In short, it was the devotion of a man of the people, the love of a working girl transferred to a higher sphere. Bourgeat did my errands. He woke me up at night at the hours I asked him to. He cleaned my lamp and polished our landing. He was as good as a servant as he were a father, and tidy as an English girl. He did the housework. Like Filippo men, he used to saw up our wood, doing everything with simplicity and dignity, for he seemed to realise that his objective added nobility to everything he did. When I left this good man to do my residence at the Hotel Dieu, he felt an indescribable grief at the thought that he could no longer live with me. He consoled himself with the prospect of saving up the money needed for the expenses of my thesis, and made me promise to come and see him on my days off. Bourgeat was proud of me. He loved me, both for my sake and for his own. If you look at my thesis, you will see that it was dedicated to him. During the last year of my internship, I had earned enough money to pay back everything I owed to this admirable old woman, by buying him an house, an horse and a water car. You were furious when I knew that I had been depriving myself of my money, but nevertheless he was delighted to see his wishes realised. He both laughed and scolded me. He looked at his cart and his horse, wiping a tear from his eye as he said, "That's bad. Oh, what a splendid cart. You shouldn't have done it. The horse is as strong as an overknoll." I've never seen anything more moving than this scene. Bourgeat absolutely insisted on buying me the case of instruments mounted in silver, which you've seen in my study, and which is for me the most valuable thing I have there. Although he was thrilled by my first successes, he ne'er let slip the least word or gesture which implied that man's success is due to me. Yet without him, poverty would have killed me. The poor man had dug his own grave to help me. He had eaten nothing but bread rubbed with garlic, so that I could have coffee to help me work at night. He fell ill. As you can imagine, I spent the nights at his bedside. I pulled him through the first time, but he had a relapse 2 years later. And in spite of the most constant care, in spite of the greatest effort of medical science, his end had come. No king were ever as well cared for as he were. Yes, bien sûr, to snatch that life from death I made supreme efforts. I wanted to make him live long enough for me to show him the results of his work, and realise all his hopes for me. I wanted to satisfy the only gratitude which has ever filled my heart, and put out a fire which still burns me today. After a pause, the plan visibly moved, resumed his tale. Bourgeat, my second father, died in my arms, leaving me everything he possessed in a will which he had made by a public letter writer, dated the year when we went to live in the Cour de Royal. This man had the simple faith of a charcoal burner. He loved the Blessed Virgin as he would have loved his wife. Although an ardent Catholic, he had never said a word to me about my lack of religion. When his life were in danger, he begged me to do everything possible to enable him to have the help of the church. I had mass said for him every day. Often during the night he would express fears for his future. He was afraid that he had not lived a sufficiently holy life. Poor man. He worked from morning to night. To whom then would paradise belong, if there is a paradise? He received the last rites like the saint he were after, and his death were worthy of his life. I was the only person to attend his funeral. When I buried my only benefactor, I tried to think of a way of paying my debt to him. I realised he had neither family nor friends, wife nor children. He was a believer. He had a religious conviction. I had any right to dispute it. He had spoken to me shyly about masses said for the repose of the dead. He didn't want to impose this duty upon me, thinking that it would be like asking payment for his services. As soon as I can establish an endowment fund, I gave St. Sulpice the necessary amount to have 4 masses said there a year. And it's the only thing I can give to Bourget is the satisfaction of his religious wishes. The day when this mass is said at the beginning of each season, I say with the good faith of a doubter, O God, if there is a sphere where after their death you place all those who have been perfect, think of good Bourget. And if there is anything for him to suffer, give me his suffering, so they may enter more quickly in what is called paradise. That, my dear fellow, is the most a man with my opinion can allow himself. God must be a decent chap. He couldn't hold it against me. I swear to you, I would give my fortune to be a believer like Bourget. Bianchon, who looked after Desplan in his last illness, dares not affirm nowadays that the distinguished surgeon died an atheist. Believers will like to think that the humble Avenant will have opened the gate of heaven for him as, earlier, he had opened for him the gate of that earthly temple, on whose doorway is written, Au grand homme le patrie reconnaissant. The author's note, these words meaning, to our great men from the grateful country, are inscribed above the doorway of the Pantheon in Paris, where many of the great men of France are buried. That's the end of the Atheist Mass. I paused to have a swallow of water. Seems to be a dry sort of night tonight. Yeah. So, what can we say of that then? Well, it's not what I expected, really. I'll say that much. When I heard the Atheist Mass, I was in my head sort of thinking some sort of deliberate religious observation for or about atheism, some affirmation of a lack of belief. But no, it's a much more touching story than that. A man honouring one who did him such good turns in his life, holding to the religious belief to try and save him even through a ritual of the church he don't believe in. A mass organised by an atheist of the church. It's not a story about faith, really, although faith is the, I suppose, framing instrument. It's a story about kindness and the meaning and the connection people make. The human connection that connected this great surgeon with the humble water carrier. And why, of course, it is that he cared so much for water carriers throughout his life. There's a quote I'm reminded of. I don't remember who said it, I don't remember perfectly how it goes, but it runs along the lines of, I am never quite so inspired by the words and works of great men and women, as I am horrified by their understanding of quite how many great people have died, in field and factory work or in bondage, starved or of illness. How many great minds have fallen to poverty and inopportunity. It's something I think about a lot. It takes money to be great, or freedom, or leisure, or some combination of all of them. It doesn't matter how great your mind is or how much potential you have if you never have the space to fulfill it. If you die of malnutrition as a student, you never become the great surgeon of your time. Great artist, great thinker. grey anything. And how many people have the time and leisure to do their best, to be the best self they can be? It's one of those small unnoticed tragedies of the world. Because it is very likely that you have never even heard of the smartest person in history. That no fragment of their legacy has survived. Because that legacy were lost in time and sorrow. And here we see a man who was destined for that, whose great mind and ability were destined to languish in squalor, for he had no way to express them, until he was saved by a man who was not great, who was not rich or powerful or mighty, or anything else. A man who was nothing, and did not even have the greatness that could have been, and he who gave everything he had to see a man who was not his relation, to whom he had no more acquaintance than neighbours, become great. Which I suppose is very fitting for a Christian, as love thine neighbour the first and greatest teaching of Christ. And here you come, convertible connective WV.V1, to prove the opposite point. To prove that for all of humanity's goodness, there are still monsters among us. People who make their living through crime and hatred, and have no love for their fellow man. Spend all their time making the world worse. And you know, I'm not a religious being myself. As a rat, you very rarely think that there might be a loving God in the world. But sometimes I do hope there is a hell for people like you. Anyway, where was I? Oh right, I was talking about human kindness. Well, moments past now, I'm afraid. Clankers ruined it. Like they ruin everything. I'd start the next story, but we're probably a minute and change from the ad break, so I don't want to. So I said let's talk a little bit about Balzac here. Oh look, there's the thing telling me there'll be an ad break in a minute. I've got to get a button here to tell people when that is happening. But yeah, Balzac's writing here is a little bit interesting. Obviously there's a lot of dialogue and it's framed. I'm not actually sure if this is a true story or not, but I doubt it. It's a little too narrative. It's framed over the course of a lifetime. And he writes a lot through people. He's very quick to give names and locations, the city of Paris. It gives a sort of grounded feeling to his writing. And again, I think it's a little bit too narrative and a bit too complete to be a real story, but it has a very realistic sort of feeling to it. His prose is pretty decent too, although at several points he does go on for paragraphs that last multiple pages, which I do not love. I do not love at all. Still, it's more readable than some we've read, more so than Melville. And there's the ad break on now, so I'll have my traditional swallow of water during the ad break, and I'm probably going to get another bottle actually, because I'm running a bit low. Don't know why I've been so thirsty today. It's not even particularly hot, just dry, I guess. But yeah, what else can I say about Balzac? Don't know really. I mean, there wasn't actually too much that stood out to me about his writing. I mean, obviously there's a fair few cultural references, which I think is fairly normal for the time period he's writing. Some historical references too, and then there's that one thing about Napoleon that he mentions that is not entirely clear. I don't know. He seems like a man with a lot to say about the world, who's sort of very opinionated in the world itself. Which I guess is interesting to see in a writing style. But yeah. Honestly, I really don't know what else to say. Like, I'm sure there's a lot you could say about Balzac. I know he's a fairly famous author of the French canon, but the only thing that ever really comes to mind is that his name is basically Honoré de Balzac, which is very funny. Like, I know he's a serious person, it's just a name, but it really does. Like, that would be an unfortunate name to have in like a modern school. You'd get bullied for that. You really would. Anyway, let me go grab a drink of water while the ad break's still, or another bottle of water, I should say, while the ad break still lasts. There we are. Right, still got a minute before the ads end, officially. Even though I'm sure most people are out of them by now. Because you never get the full thing of ads, even though it says you're going to get a certain amount of time. I don't know how ads work. But yeah. What does surprise me actually is how little medicine sort of factors into this story for being about two doctors. And maintaining a sort of, what's the term, informed or intellectual atheism. You think it'd matter more in the story, but it really doesn't. Even atheism doesn't really factor into it too much, other than as the inciting incident for the discovery of the fusion. An odd little story. An odd little story indeed. Right, there about comes the end of the outbreaks. 3, 2, 1, and welcome back. So, I've said all I wanted to say about that story, and I've done a little bit of talking about Honoré de Balzac, which was very serious during the outbreak. Definitely wasn't anything silly being said. So, that being the case, let's press on to the second story. The Conscript. There is an opening quote. Sometimes they saw that, by a phenomenon of vision and movement, he could abolish space in its two aspects of time and distance, one of these being intellectual and the other physical. That's from the Histoire intellectuelle de Louis Lambert. One evening, in the month of November 1793, the most important people in Carentan were gathered together in the drawing room of Madame de Day, who received a company every day. Certain circumstances which would not have attracted attention in a large town, but which was bound to arouse curiosity in a small one, gave an unwanted interest to this this everyday gathering. 2 days earlier, Madame de Day had closed her doors to visitors, and she had not received any the previous day either, pretending that she had run well. In normal times, these two events would have had the same effect, in Carentan as the closing of the theatre as in Paris. On such days, existence is, in a way, incomplete. But in 1793, Madame de Day's behaviour could have had the most disastrous consequences. At that time, if an aristocrat risked the least step, he were nearly always involved in a matter of life and death. To understand properly the eager curiosity and the narrow-minded cunning which, during that evening, were expressed on the faces of all these Norman worthies, but above all to appreciate the secret worries of Madame de Day, the part she played at Carentan must be explained. As the critical position in which she was placed at that time were no doubt that of many people during the Revolution, the sympathies of more than one reader will give an emotional background to this narrative. Madame de Day, the widow of a lieutenant general, a chevalier of several orders, had left the court at the beginning of the immigration. As she owned a considerable amount of property in the Carentan region, she had taken refuge there, hoping that the influence of the terror would be little felt in those parts. This calculation, founded on accurate knowledge of the region, were correct. The revolution wrought little havoc in Lower Normandy. Although in the past, when Madame de Day visited her property in Normandy, she associated only with the noble families of the district, she now made a policy of opening her doors to the principal townspeople and the new authorities, trying to make them proud of having won her over, without arousing either their hatred or their jealousy. She was charming and kind, and gifted with that indescribable gentleness, which enabled her to please without having to lower herself or ask favours. She had succeeded in winning general esteem thanks to her perfect tact, which enabled her to keep wise to a narrow path, satisfying the demands of that mixed society, without humiliating the touchy amour propre of the parvenu, or upsetting the sensibilities of her old friends. She was about 38 years old, and she still retained not the fresh, rounded good looks which distinguished the girls of lower Normandy, but a slender, as it were aristocratic type of beauty. Her features were neat and delicate, her figure were graceful and slender. When she spoke, her pale face seemed to light up and come to life. Her large black eyes was full of friendliness, but their calm, religious expression seemed to show that the mainspring of her existence were no longer within herself. In the prime of her youth, she had been married to a jealous old soldier, and her false position at a flirtatious court no doubt helped to spread a veil of serious melancholy over a face which must once have shone with the charms and vivacity of love. Since, at an age where a woman still feels rather than reflects, she had always had to repress her instinctive feminine feelings and emotions, passion had remained unawakened in the depths of her heart. Very good, Abbe. I shall do as you command. Thank you for the art drink. You good health. I remain as ever, your loyal Tamagotchi. You cannot see it, but I am saluting. In a most sincere and unironic fashion. But no, really, thank you. It is good for you, good of you. Since, at an age when a woman still feels rather than reflects, she had always had to repress her instinctive feminine feelings and emotions, passion had remained unawakened in the depths of her heart. And so her principal attraction seemed from the inner youthfulness which were, at times, revealed in her face, which gave her thoughts an expression of innocent desire. Her appearance commanded respect, but in her bearing and in her voice, there were always the expectancy of an unknown future, as with a young girl. Soon after meeting her, the least susceptible of men would find himself in love with her, and it retained a kind of respectful fear of her, inspired by her courteous, dignified manner. Her soul, naturally great, but strengthened by cruel struggles, seemed far removed from ordinary humanity, and men recognised her inferiority. This soul needed a dominating passion. Madame de Dey's affections were thus concentrated in one single feeling, that of maternity. The happiness and the satisfaction of which she had been deprived as a wife, she found instead in the intense love she had for her son. She loved him not only with the pure and profound devotion of a mother, but with the coquetry of a mistress and the jealousy of a wife. She was unhappy when he was away, and anxious during his absence. She could never see enough of him, and lived only through and for him. To make the reader appreciate the strength of this feeling, it will suffice to add that this son was not only Madame de Dey's only child, but also her last surviving relative, the one being on whom she could fasten the fears, the hopes and joys of her life. The late Comte de Dey was the last of his family, and she was the sole heiress of hers. Material motives and interests, thus combined with the noblest needs of the soul, will intensify in the Countess's heart a feeling which is already so strong in women. It was only by taking the greatest of care that she had managed to bring up her son, and this had made him even more dear to her. 20 times the doctors told her she would lose him, but confident in her own hopes and instances, she had the inexpressible joy of seeing him safely overcome the perils of childhood, and of marvelling at the improvement in his health, in spite of the doctor's verdict. Due to her constant care, this son had grown up and developed into such a charming young man that at the age of 20 he was regarded as one of the most accomplished young courtiers of her sire. Above all, thanks to her good fortune, which did not crown the efforts of every mother, she was adored by her son. They understood each other in fraternal sympathy. If they had not already been linked by the ties of their nature, they would have instinctively felt for each other that mutual friendship which one meets so rarely in life. At the age of 18, the young Count had been appointed a sub-lieutenant of dragoons, and in obedience to the code of honour of the period, he had followed the princes when they emigrated. Madame de Dey, noble, rich, and the mother of an émigré, thus could not conceal from herself the dangers of her cruel situation. As her only wish was to preserve her large fortune for her son, she had denied herself the happiness of going with him. And when she read the strict laws under which the Republic were confiscating every day the property of émigrés and Carnahan, she congratulated herself on this act of courage. Was she not watching over her son's wealth at the risk of her life? Then, when she heard of the terrible executions decreed by the conventions, she slept peacefully in the knowledge that her only treasure were in safety, far from the danger of the scaffold. She was happy in the belief that she had done what was best to save both her son and her fortune. This private thought she made the concessions demanded by those unhappy times, without compromising her feminine dignity or her aristocratic convictions, but hiding her sorrows with a cold secrecy. She understood the difficulties which awaited her at Carentan. To come there and occupy the first place, wasn't that a way of defying the scaffold every day? But supported by the courage of a mother, she knew how to win the affection of the poor by relieving all kinds of distress without distinction, and made herself indispensable to the rich by ministering to their pleasures. She had attained at her house the procureur of the commune, the mayor, the president, the district, the public prosecutor, and even the judges of the revolutionary tribunal. An author's note here on the procureur is an official elected to represent the central government on local courts administrations. The first four of these was unmarried, and so they courted her, hoping to marry her either by making her afraid of the harm they could do to her, or by offering her their protection. The public prosecutor had been procureur at Caen and used to look after the Countess's business interest, tried to make her love him by behaving with devotion and generosity. A dangerous form of cunning. Ooh, I disappeared there for a second. That is not ideal. I seem to go. Oh, no. Why am I disappearing? This has become an increasingly frequent problem for me. I simply do not understand it. You'd think I'd have this more under control, but no. Right, am I coming back? Give me a minute. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Well, I guess for a moment I shall have to remain the I'm out for you. Maybe I'll just oh no, there I am. Right. Sorry about that. Oh, yes. The public prosecutor had been a procureur at Caen and used to look after the Countess's business interests. Tried to make her love him by behaving with devotion and generosity. A dangerous form of cunning. He was the most formidable of all the suitors. As she had formerly been a client of his, he was the only one who had intimate knowledge of the state of considerable fortune. His passion was reinforced by all the desire of avarice and supported by the immense power of life and death, through the district. You know what? Maybe this is fair. Maybe I am a mountain. Maybe that's what I need to take away from this. I am the serenity and stillness of Mount Fuji. Okay. We're going to go with that, and we're going to say this is intentional. The power of life and death throughout the district. This man, who was still young, behaved with such an appearance of magnanimity that the Madame de Dey had not yet been able to form her opinion on him. At the start of the danger, which lay in vying and cunning of Normans, she made use of the inventive craftiness with which nature has endowed women to play off these rivals against each other. By gaining time, she hoped to survive safe and sound at the end of the revolutionary troubles. That period, the royalists who had stayed in France deluded themselves each day that the next day would see the end of the revolution, and this conviction caused the ruin of many of them. Oh good, I'm back. In spite of these difficulties, the Countess had very skillfully maintained her independence, until the day on which, with unaccountable imprudence, she took it into her head to close her door. The interest she aroused was so deep and genuine that the people who had come to her house that evening became extremely anxious when they learned that it were impossible for her to receive them. Then, with that frank curiosity which engaged in provincial manners, they made inquiries about the misfortune, the sorrow, or the illness which Madame de Dey must be suffering from. An old servant named Brigitte answered these questions, saying that her mistress had shut herself up in her room and wouldn't see anyone, not even members of her own household. The almost cloister-like existence led by the inhabitants of a small town forms in them an habit of analysing and explaining the actions of others. This habit is naturally so invincible that after pitying Madame de Day, without knowing whether she was really happy or sad, everyone began to look for the causes of her sudden retreat. If she were ill, said the first inquirer, she would have said for the doctor. The doctor spent the whole day at my house playing chess. He said to me jokingly that nowadays there is only one illness, and that unfortunately is incurable. The jests were made with caution. Men and women, old men and girls, then began to range over the vast field of conjectures. Each one thought he spied a secret, and this secret filled all their imaginations. The next day their suspicions had grown nastier. As life is lived in public in a small town, the women were the first to find out that Brigitte had brought more provisions than usual at the market. This fact could not be denied. Brigitte had been seen first thing in the morning in the market square, and, strange to relate, she had brought the only air available. The old town knew that Madame de Day did not like game. The air became a starting point for endless conjecture. As they took their daily walk, the old men noticed in the Countess's house a kind of concentrated activity, which were revealed by the very precautions taken by the servants to conceal it. The valet were beating a carpet in the garden. The previous day no one would have paid any attention to it. This carpet had become a piece of evidence in support of the fanciful tales, which everyone were inventing. Each person had his own. The second day, when they heard that Madame de Day said she were unwell, the leading inhabitants of Carenham gathered together in the evening at the mayor's brother's house. He was a retired merchant, married, honourable, generally respected. The Countess had no regard for him. That evening all the suitors of the hand of the rich widow had more or less probable tale to tell, and each one of them considered out of turn of his own profit the secret event which forced her to place herself in this compromising position. The public prosecutor imagined an old drama in which Madame de Day's son would be brought to her house at night. The mayor thought that a nonjuring priest had arrived from La Vendée and sought asylum with her. There's an author's note there. The priest often helped the inhabitants of La Vendée in the west of France in their rising against the revolution. But the purchase of an heir on Friday couldn't be explained by this story. The president of the district were convinced she were riding the Chouan, or a Vendéan leader who would be hotly pursued. As authors note on Chouan, the Chouans were royalist insurgents from western France who engaged in guerrilla warfare against the revolution. Others thought it were a noble who had escaped from the Paris prisons. In short, everyone suspected the Countess of being guilty of one of these acts of generosity which the law of the period called a crime, which could lead to the scaffold. The public prosecutor, however, whispered that they must be silent to try and save the unfortunate one from the abyss to which she was hastening. Now pause here to have a swallow of water. If you make this affair known, he added, I shall be obliged to intervene, to search your house and then. He said no more, but everyone understood what he meant. The Countess's real friends were so alarmed for her that, on the morning of the third day, the procureur syndic of the committee got his wife to write her a note urging her to receive company that evening as usual. Bolder still, the retired merchant called at Madame de Day's house during the morning. Very conscious of the service which he wanted to render her, he insisted on being allowed in to see her, and were amazed when he caught sight of her in the garden, busy cutting the last flowers from her borders to fill her vases. She must have given refuge to a lover, the old man said to himself, as he were overcome with pity for this charming woman. The strange expression of the Countess's face confirmed his suspicion. The merchant was deeply moved by this devotion, which is so natural to women, but which men always find touching because they are all flattered by the sacrifices which woman makes for a man. He told the Countess about the rumours which were all over the town, and the danger which she were placed. For, he said in conclusion, though some of her officials may be willing to forgive you for acting heroically to save a priest, nobody will pity you if they find out you're sacrificing yourself for the sake of a love affair. At these words, Madame de Day looked at the old man with a distraught and crazy expression, which made him shudder, despite his age. Come with me, she said. taking him by the hand and leading him into her room, where, having first made sure they were alone, she took a dirty, crumpled letter from the bodice of her dress. "Read that," she cried, pronouncing the words with great effort. She collapsed into her chair, as if she were overcome, while the old merchant were looking for his glasses and cleaning them. She looked up at him, examined him for the first time with interest, and said gently in a faltering voice, "I can trust you." "Have I not come to share in your crime?" replied the worthy man simply. She gave a start. For the first time in this little town, her foe felt sympathy with another's. The merchant understood at once both dejection and the joy of the Countess. Her son had taken part in the Granville expedition. His letter to his mother were written from the depth of his prison, giving her one sad yet joyful hope. He had no doubts about his means of escape, and he mentioned 3 days in the course of which he would come to the house in disguise. The fatal letter contained heartrending farewells in case he would not be at Carentan by the evening of the 3rd day, and he begged his mother to give a fairly large sum of money to the messenger who, braving countless dangers, had undertaken to bring her this letter. The paper shook in the old man's hands. "And this is the 3rd day," cried Madame today, as she got up quickly, took back the letter and paced up and down the room. "You have acted rashly," said the merchant. "Why have you had food brought in?" But he made the road dying with hunger, exhausted, and she said no more. "I can count on my brother," continued the old man. "I will go and bring him over to your side." In this situation, the merchant deployed again all the subtlety which he had formerly used in business, and gave the Countess prudent and wise advice. I've just realised, sorry, there's a note I didn't notice on the Granville expedition. Granville is a small town southwest of Carentan, on the other side of the Carentan Peninsula. In 1793, the Vendées tried unsuccessfully to capture it for the royalists. In this situation, the merchant deployed again all the subtlety which he had formerly used in business, and gave the Countess prudent and wise advice. After they had agreed on what they both should say and do, the old man, on cleverly invented pretexts, went to the principal's house in Carentan. There he announced that he had just seen Madame today, who would receive company that evening, though she were not very well. As he were a good match for the cunning Norman minds, who, in every family, cross-examined him about the nature of the Countess's illness, he managed to deceive nearly everybody who were interested in the mysterious affair. His first visit worked wonders. He told a gouty old lady that Madame Didet had nearly died from an attack of stomach gout. The famous Dr. Tronchin had, on former similar occasions, advised her to lay on her chest the skin of an hare, which had been flayed alive, lest they absolutely immobile and dead. The Countess, who, 2 days ago, had been in mortal danger, were now, after having punctiliously obeyed Tronchin's extraordinary instructions, well enough to receive visitors that evening. This tale had enormous success, and the Carentan doctor, a secret royalist, added to the effect by the seriousness with which he discussed the remedy. Nevertheless, suspicion had taken root too strongly in the minds of some obstinate people, or some doubters, to be entirely dissipated. So that evening Madame Didet's visitors come eagerly in good time. Some who would observe her face carefully, others out of friendship, most of them amazed at her recovery. They found the Countess with a large fireplace in her drawing room, which were almost as small as the other drawing rooms in Carentan. But to avoid offending the narrow-minded ideas of her guests, she denied herself the luxury she had been used to, and so made no changes to her house. The floor of the reception room were not even polished. She left dingy old hangings on the walls, kept the local furniture, burnt tallow candles, and followed the fashions of the place. She adopted provincial life without shrinking from its most uncomfortable meanness, its most disagreeable privations. As she knew that her guests would forgive her any lavishness conducive to their comfort, she left nothing undone which would minister to their personal pleasures, and so she always provided excellent dinners. She went as far as to feign meanness in order to please these calculating minds, and she skilfully admitted to certain concessions of luxury, in order to give in gracefully. And so about 7 o'clock that evening, the best of Carentan's poor society were in Madame Didet's house, and formed a large circle around the hearth. The mistress of the house, supported in her trouble by the old merchant's sympathetic glances, endured with remarkable courage her guests' detailed questioning and their frivolous and stupid arguments. At every knock at the door, whenever there were a sound of footsteps in the street, She hid her violent emotions by raising questions of importance to the prosperity of the district. She started off lively discussions about the quality of the ciders, and was so well supported by her confidant, the company always forgot to spy on her, since the expressions of her face were so natural, and her self-possession so imperturbable. Nevertheless, the public prosecutor and one of the judges of the Revolutionary Tribunal said little, watching carefully the least changes in her expression and, in spite of the noise, listening to every sound in the house. Every now and then they asked the Countess awkward questions, but she answered them with admirable presence of mind. A mother has so much courage. When Madame de Dey had arranged the card players and settled everyone at the tables to play Boston or Reversi or whist, she still lingered in quite a carefree manner to chat with some young people. She would play on her part like a consummate actress. She got someone to ask for Lotta, pretend to be the only person who knew where the set was, and left the room. "I feel stifled, my dear Bridget," she exclaimed when she wiped the tears springing from her eyes, which shone with fever, grief, and impatience. "He is not coming," she continued as she went upstairs and looked round the bedroom. "Here I can breathe and live, yet in a few more moments he would be here. But he is alive, of that I am sure. My heart tells me so. Don't you hear anything, Bridget? Oh, I would give the rest of my life to know whether he is in prison or walking across the countryside. I wish I could stop thinking." She looked round the room again to see if everything were in order. The good fire were bright and brightly in the grate. The shutters were tightly closed. The polished furniture were gleaming. The way the bed had been made showed that the Countess had discussed the smallest details with Brigitte. Her hopes could be discerned in the fastidious care which she obviously had lavished on the room. In the scent of the flowers she had placed there could be sensed the gracious sweetness, the most chaste caress or love. Only a mother could have anticipated a soldier's wants and made preparations to satisfy them so completely. A superb meal, choice wine, slippers, clean linen, in short everything that a weary traveller could need or desire were brought together, so that he should lack for nothing, so that the delights of the home should show him a mother's love. I'll pause briefly to have a swallow of water. "Brigitte," cried the Countess, in heart-rending voice, as she went to place a chair at the table. It was as if she wanted to make her prayers come true, as if she wanted to add strength to her illusion. "Ah, madame, he will come. He is not far away. I am sure that he is alive and on his way. But a key in the Bible, and I kept it on my fingers while Cotton read the Gospel of St. John. And, madame, the key didn't turn." "Is that a reliable sign?" asked the Countess. "Oh, yes, madame. It's well known. But stake my soul he is still alive. God cannot be wrong. I would love to see him, in spite of the danger he will be in when he gets here." "Oh, Monsieur Auguste," cried Brigitte, "he must be on the way on foot." "And there's the church clock striking 8, exclaimed the Countess in terror. She was afraid that she had stayed longer than she should have done in this room, where, as everything bore witness to her son's life, she could still believe that he were alive. She went downstairs, but before going into the drawing room she paused for a moment under the pillars of the staircase, listening to hear if any sound disturbed the silent echoes of the town. She smiled at Brigitte's husband, who kept guard like a sentinel, and seemed dazed with the effort of straining to hear the sounds of the night from the village square. She saw her son in everything and everywhere. She soon went back into the room, put on an air of gaiety, and began to play lotto with some little girls. But every now and then she complained of not feeling well, and sat down in her armchair by the fireplace. That is how people and things were in Madame de Dey's house, while, on the road from Paris to Cherbourg, a young man wearing brown carmagnole, the obligatory dress of the period, was making his way to Carentan. On the conscription of August 1793 first come into force, there were little or no discipline. The needs of the moment were such that the Republic could not equip its soldiers immediately. It was not uncommon to see the roads full of the conscripts still wearing the civilian clothes. These young men reached their halting places ahead of their battalions, or lagged behind. Their progress depended on their ability to endure the fatigues of a long march. The traveller in question was some way ahead of a column of conscripts which were going to Cherbourg, and which the mayor of Carentan were expecting from hour to hour, intending to billet the men on the inhabitants. The young man marched with a heavy tread. He was still walking steadily, and his bearing suggested he had long been familiar with the hardships of military life. Although the meadowland around Carrington were lit up by the moon, he had noticed a big white cloud threatening snowfall over the countryside. The fear of being caught in a storm probably made him walk faster, for he was going at a pace ill-suited to his fatigue. On his back he had an almost empty rucksack, and in his hand were a boxwood stick, cut from one of the thick edges, which this shrub forms around most of the estate of Lower Normandy. A moment after the solitary traveller had caught sight of the towers of Carrington silhouetted in the eerie moonlight, he entered the town. His step aroused the echoes of the silent, deserted streets, and he had to ask a weaver, who was still at work, the way to the mayor's house. This official did not live far away, and the conscript soon found himself in the shelter of the porch of the mayor's house. He applied for a billet in order and sat down on the stone seat to wait. He had to appear before the mayor, who had sent for him, and he was subjected to a scrupulous cross-examination. The soldier was a young man of good appearance, who seemed to belong to a good family. His demeanour indicated that he was of noble birth, and his face expressed the intelligence which comes from a good education. "What's your name?" asked the mayor, looking at him knowingly. "Julian Jason," replied the conscript. "And where do you come from?" asked the official with an incredulous smile. "From Paris." "Your comrades must be some distance away," continued the Norman half-jokingly. "I'm 3 miles ahead of the battalion." "Some special feeling attacks you to Carrington, no doubt. Citoyen de questionnaire," said the mayor shrewdly. "It's all right," he added, as with little no. "It is all right," he added, as with a gesture he imposed silence on the young man who was about to speak. "We know where to send you. There you are," he added, giving him his billet in order. "Off you go, Citoyen Jussieu." And there is a author's note on the phrase citoyen. Citoyen was a form of a gesture in the Revolution, replacing monsieur. A decree that passed by the National Convention in 1793 called for military service of all men between 18 and 25. The conscripts were known as requisitionnaires. There was a tinge of irony in the official's tone as he pronounced the last 2 words, and handed out a billet order giving the address of Madame de Dey's house. The young man read the address with an air of curiosity. He knows quite well that he hasn't far to go. Once he's outside, he'll soon be across the square, exclaimed the mayor, talking to himself as the young man went out. He's got some nerve, may God guide him. He has an answer to everything, yes, but if anyone but me had asked to see his papers, he would have been lost. At this moment, the Carrington clocks had just struck 9:30. The torches was being lit in Madame de Dey's antechamber. The servants was helping their master and mistress to put on their cloaks, their overcoats or their capes. The card players had settled their accounts, and they were all leaving together, according to the established custom in little towns. "It looks like the prosecutor wants to say," said a lady who had noticed that this important personage was missing. When, having exhausted all the formulae of leave taken, they separated into the square to go to their respective homes. In fact, that terrible magistrate were alone with the countess, who were waiting, trembling, till he chose to go. After a long and rather frightening silence, he said at last, "I am here to see that the laws of the Republic are obeyed." Madame de Dey shuffled. "Have you nothing to reveal to me?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied, amazed. "Madame," cried the prosecutor, sitting down beside her and changing his tone. "At this moment, one word could send you or me to the scaffold. I have observed your character, your feelings, your ways too closely to share the mistake into which you managed to lead your guests this evening. I have no doubt at all that you are expecting your son." The Countess made a gesture of denial. She had grown pale, and the muscles of her face had contracted under the necessity of assuming a false air of calmness. "Well, receive him," continued the magistrate of the Revolution. "Don't let him stay under your roof after 7 o'clock in the morning. On day after tomorrow I should come to her, armed with a denunciation, which I should have thrown up." She looked at him with a dazed expression which would have melted the heart of a tiger. He went on gently. "I shall demonstrate the falsity of the denunciation by a minute search, and by the nature of my report you will be protected from all further suspicion. I shall speak of your patriotic gifts, of your civic devotion, you shall all be saved." Madame de Dey were afraid of a trap. She stood there motionless, but her face was burned and her tongue was frozen. The sound of the door knocker rang through the house. "Ah!" cried the terrified mother, falling on her knees. "Save him! Save him!" "Yes, let us save him," replied the public prosecutor, looking at her passionately, "even at the cost of our lives." "I am lost," she cried, as the prosecutor politely helped her to her feet. "Ah, madame," he replied with a fine oratorical gesture, "I want to owe you nothing but yourself." "Madame is," cried Bridget, thinking her mistress were alone. At the sight of the public prosecutor, the old servant, who had been flushed with joy, had become pale and motionless. "Louise Brigitte," asked the magistrate gently, with no expression. "A conscript sent by the mayor to be put up here," replied the servant, showing the bill of order. "That's right," said the prosecutor after reading the order. "A battalion is due in the town tonight." And he went out. At that moment the Countess needed so much to believe in the sincerity of her former lawyer that she could not entertain the slightest doubt of it. Quickly she went upstairs, though she scarcely had the strength to stand. Then she opened her bedroom door, saw her son, and fell half dead into his arms. "Oh, my child, she cried, sobbing and covering him with wild kisses. "Madame," said the stranger. "Oh, it's someone else," she cried. She recoiled in horror and stood in front of the conscript, gazing at him with an haggard look. "Oh, good God, what a strong resemblance," said Bridget. There was silence for a moment, and even the stranger shuddered at the sight of Madame de Dey. She leaned for support on Brigitte's husband, and felt the fullest extent of grief. This first blow had almost killed her. "Monsieur," she said, "I cannot bear to see you any longer. I hope you won't mind that my servants take my place and look after you." She went down to her own room, half carried by Brigitte and her old manservant. "What, madame?" cried the housekeeper as she helped her mistress to sit down. "Is that man going to sleep in Monsieur Auguste's bed? Put on Monsieur Auguste's slippers and eat the pâté that I made for Monsieur Auguste. If I were to be sent to the guillotine, I—" "Brigitte," cried Madame de Dey. Brigitte said no more. "Be quiet, you chatterbox," said her husband in a low voice. "To be the death of madame." At this moment the conscript made a noise in his room as he sat down at the table. "I can't stay here," exclaimed Madame de Dey. "I shall go into the conservatory, and there I shall be able to hear better what's going on outside during the night." She was still wavering between the fear of having lost her son and the hope of seeing him come back. The silence of the night were horrible. When the conscript battalion came into town and each man had to seek out his lodgings, it was a terrible time for the Countess. Her hopes were dashed at every footstep, at every sound. Then soon the awful stillness of nature returned. Toward morning the Countess had to go back to her own room. Brigitte, who was watching her mistress's movements, did not see her come out. She went into the room and there found the Countess dead. She must have heard the conscripts finishing dressing and walking about in Monsieur Auguste's room, singing their damn Marseillaise as if he were in a stable, cried Brigitte. That would have killed her. The Countess's death was caused by a more important feeling, and very likely a terrible vision. The exact moment when Madame de Dey was dying in Carentan, her son was being shot in Le Mauban. We can add this tragic fact that all the observations that have been made are sympathies which override the laws of space. Some learned recluses, in their curiosity, have collected this evidence in documents which will one day serve as a foundation for a new science. A science that has hitherto failed to produce its man of genius. And that's the end of the conscript. I'll move back over to my little room for the last discussion. I'll have a quick swallow of water before we do it. Now, it has to be said that, being as I am a rat, I don't have the most sympathy for the nobility, just in general, really. Obviously, there is, there's... You're very welcome, Abbe. What I was saying is, yeah, it has to be said that there is a certain amount of privilege and undue advantage given to nobles that is denied most people. But that being said, tragedy is tragedy. And of course the French Revolution were a very tragic time for a lot of people in nobility. It's never nice to have to suffer, not for one's own sake, but for the sake of one for whom you care. And a mother having to fear for her son is a terrible thing. So while I don't have the general sympathy for the nobility that I think Balzac seems to proffer it, you're very welcome, Tenor. I hope you've enjoyed it. But yeah, while I don't have the general sympathy here for the nobility that Balzac seems to be offering, very welcome as well. I do feel very strongly for the personal tragedy. It's a terribly sad thing. I always think it's interesting that Balzac seems to here be sort of what's the term? To be predicting some sort of science almost akin to quantum entanglement in a very strange way, which is interesting. But yeah, there's not much else to say about this really. I mean, obviously there's history and things you can put into it, but it's mostly just sad. So I think we'll call it there. I don't have much else to say. Let's see who's live to read down. Oh, Lutina's live. Let's read it well. Yeah. Let's read into Lutina. For those of you who don't know, Lutina is a goblin who captains a sort of magical spaceship, and she's currently playing 100 Line, which is almost the opposite of good literature. So, you know, a little bit of a palate cleanser. Thank you everyone for being here. I do very much appreciate you all. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day up until the end of my next stream, which... Oh, that's something to remark, actually. Again, tomorrow will be Torrid Tuesdays, and because we have our 50 follower goal, it'll be another up close Torrid Tuesdays, where I read like this. So that's something to look forward to. I hope you join me for that. Yeah, other than that, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. I always, as always, do appreciate you being here. Yeah, I'm glad you're looking forward to it. We'll probably do a little bit of poetry beforehand, so hopefully that'll be fun. But yeah, and I do hope to see you there. Because if you're not there, you won't get my benediction, which, as I established, you only get until the end of my next stream. But yeah, as always, hope you have a lovely time, lovely rest of your day, and ta-ra.